CBSE Board, History, Chapter 8, Part 9. Audio by Renee Matthew. In the previous episode, we saw that there was a big conflict because of caste system between two groups in Travancore, in the glorious Travancore, between the Nayars and the Shanas. British rule and dress codes. So Indians had all these problems, conflicts were there. What was the reaction of the foreigners, the Britishers, to all these conflicts? How did the British react to Indian ways of dressing? That is, whatever they had, their traditional attire and everything. How did Indians react to British attitudes? In different cultures, specific items of clothing often convey contrary. So it was two different culture, two different attitude, two different style of thinking. So when there is a kind of clothing or style that is adapted by one society, for example, the Westerners will wear hat. That is something which is a part of their culture and it has got a meaning. Similarly, for the Indians, we wear the turban, we wear dhoti. All these things has got symbolic meanings and symbolic significance. So in different cultures, different items of clothing will have different significance. There is a meaning of it. So what happened here in India? We have got the foreigners, that is the Britishers who came and colonized India. So definitely India was expected to be subservient and also to surrender to the foreigners right now. So two cultures clashed. There was a clash of two cultures because of misunderstanding, because of conflict, and that is because they used so many things in their clothing. Like it is a combination of many things when you design your dress from different countries or different parts of the world. It has got a symbolic meaning, just like how I told you now. Let's see what was the problem. Look at the black box which is given there. Styles of clothing in British India changed through conflict. So it is only through conflict that everything changed. Definitely the foreigners, for their convenience, will expect the Indians to just imitate them and dress like them because it is for convenience sake and comfort sake. But Indians, everybody was not ready to give up their traditional style of clothing because they were Indians and the culture and heritage was so rich in India. We couldn't even compare ourselves to any other part of the world. It was so rich. So much of clash of identity, of clothing, of language, of culture, everything was seen here. What were the changes? Can you see two pictures there? Consider the case of the turban and the hat. A man wearing a nice turban from India and a man wearing a hat. The Western style is also seen on the right hand side of the screen. When European traders first began frequenting India, when they started visiting India, they were distinguished from the Indian turban wearers as the hat wearers. So it is like how a child distinguishes between two pictures. If you give two pictures to a child, like the picture is the same of a fish, but one is colored in orange and the other one is colored in green. The child will say one is in green, one is in orange. So that is like the differentiation which is made on the look or visual kind of impact on the child will make the child say that the colors are different. So something similar to that where the visual depiction of these two part of the cloth, that is the hat, it had a symbolic meaning both in India and in the western part of the world. In India we had the turban and there they had the hat. So they distinguish the Indians from the Westerners as turban wearers and hat wearers. Very easy. It is like when you look at it, there is a differentiation that you can make. When you, before going very deep into the culture, oh yes, he's a turban wearer, he's a hat wearer. Instead of telling Indian and Englishman, this is how they differentiated. These two headgears, anything that you wear on the head is known as headgear. We had the headgear in Victorian era. Also, do you remember for the women, which was so elaborate, so colorful? Yes. These two headgears not only looked different, they also signified different things. So, as I told you earlier, there were two different meanings which was meant for these two different headgears. The first one, the first point, these parts of the text are really very important because it is from here that the transformation took place. If you don't understand these parts of the text, you will not understand what happened later. The turban in India was not just for protection from the heat. So, one main reason for why people wore turban is to protect themselves from the heat. But it was also a sign of respectability and could not be removed at will. So, one thing is to protect themselves from the heat. Second was like to pay respect. If you visit dignitaries, if you visit people of higher order, you were expected to wear a turban, which clearly said that you are paying respect to the person. So first is to protect from the heat, and also it is a sign of respectability. In the Western tradition, the hat had to be removed before social superiors as a sign of respect. So that we can see even in movies now also, when they go to visit higher dignitaries, they were expected to remove the turban. But Indians were supposed to wear the turban. So look at the contradiction there. A lot of difference is there. One is expected to wear when you visit dignitaries, one is expected to remove. So those were the changes. So that is why I have given these points as 1 and 2. This cultural difference created misunderstanding. So when you read it now, it is really humorous. But that was not the situation then. Lot of problems came about. Now the real conflict begins. The British were often offended if Indians did not take off their turban when they met colonial officials. So, what was the custom of the Indians? To wear the turban when you met people of higher authority. So, what they did, they wore turbans when they met the colonial officials, that is, the Englishmen. What was the custom of the Englishmen? To remove the hat when they met dignitaries. So, the Britishers really felt offended when the Indians did not remove their turbans when they met the colonial officials. Many Indians, on the other hand, wore the turban to consciously assert their regional or national identity. So, big conflict was there. So, you should understand one thing. Initially, when the Britishers came to India, it was very difficult to communicate with them. It's not just in knowing English or understanding what they said. The type of language and also the way they communicated was totally different. The expressions that they use is different from what we use. Even now, it is like that. So, there was a lot of misunderstanding between these two cultures. It was a clash because one, the same headgear, it is like one is turban and one is a hat, and both are worn on the head. But the impact of this headgear in both the countries was really different, which created a lot of conflicts. Now we have the greatest part of the text, which is really humorous, but it really created a big transformation in history. The shoe conflict. Are you really interested to know what the shoe conflict is? Okay, come on. At the beginning of the 19th century, everything is happening in the 19th century, it was customary for British officials to follow Indian etiquette and remove their footwear in the courts of ruling kings or chiefs. So, British officials were supposed to follow the Indian etiquette, that is, to remove their shoes when they come in front of even Indian kings, of people from the higher levels of thinking, like court, it can be a king, it can be anybody from the higher class or upper class. So, this happened before the complete colonization, where they also respected our higher authority. Some British officials also wore Indian clothes. They were very happy to wear Indian clothes because that was part of our tradition. It is Indian etiquette or culture, customary. But in 1830, Europeans were forbidden from wearing Indian clothes at official functions. so that the cultural identity of the white masters was not undermined. So some of them did not really like to wear Indian clothes because they thought that they were moving away from their culture and tradition, like how our Indians responded to the British clothes. Some of them felt, no, we saw there were three reactions. The second reaction or second part of the population told that we are not going to wear these kind of Western clothes because it is possible that we drift away from our traditional wear. So the Europeans also felt the same thing. They stopped using Indian clothes when they went for functions. At the same time, Indians were expected to wear Indian clothes to office and follow Indian dress code. So, Indians were supposed to wear their dress when they went to the office. Shoe respect. Very interesting. In 1824, from 1824 to 1828, Governor General Amherst insisted that Indians take their shoes off as a sign of respect when they appeared before him. But this was not strictly followed. So, his demand was that, like I told you earlier, that when the British officials or anybody went to meet people from the higher authority in India, it can be a king, it can be a person from a court, they were supposed to take off the shoes. So, what did this particular Governor General Amherst say? He said that whenever a person comes in front of me, you have to remove your shoes, and it was not strictly followed. He wanted everybody to remove their shoes when they came before him, whether it is Indian or a Britisher. Even people from the higher authority in India was expected to do that. Will they do that? We don't know. Let's see. By the mid 19th century, when Lord Dalhousie was Governor General, shoe respect was made stricter, and Indians were made to take off their shoes when entering any government institution. Only those who wore European clothes were exempted from this rule. So, what was the rule earlier? Indians were expected to wear Indian clothes when they went for work. That was the rule of the government, or the law said that clearly. Britishers can wear European clothes, but it is good if they wear Indian clothes, especially when they go to meet the higher authority. But some of them were really restless by 1830, and the Europeans themselves asked their people not to do that, not to drift away from their culture and wear these Indian attires. And Indians were asked to wear Indian dress codes. But here what happened? Amherst told you should take off your shoes when you come in front of me. There's another Governor General who came after Amherst. He made these rules very stricter. So Amherst, maybe he was not very strict with it, but Dalhousie made it very strict where he told not only you should take off your shoes when you come to meet me, you should also wear European clothes. If you're wearing European clothes, you need not take off your shoes, which meant that anybody who comes in front of Dalhousie was expected to wear European clothes. Indirect imposition of law. Indirectly, he's telling that he did not encourage Indian clothing. Many Indian government servants were increasingly uncomfortable with these rules because it is not fair from their part to impose such kind of rules. And though the title is said to be shoe respect, they were really trying hard to force the Indians to behave in a particular way which they were not used to. It is not just in adopting yourself the Western style of dressing, but it is also like forcing yourself to not even pay attention to your traditional attire. You have a custom. Like when you go to the Western country also, you will long to wear a kurta, you will long to wear a lehenga, you will long to wear your dhoti. So that was not encouraged even for occasions. These governor generals were so strict and they were so adamant that they did not encourage the Indian style of dressing, and they were asked to take off their shoes when they met them. It is like if you're going to wear the Indian attire, you're inferior. They promoted this feeling of inferiority among the Indian population, making them feel that when you don't know the language English, when you don't dress like the Europeans, when you don't think like the Europeans, what will happen? We will treat you as an inferior person. So that is what they wanted to promote, and even give a message to these Indians saying that you better adapt and adopt yourself to the Western style. And why was it done? It was mostly done for their convenience.